Hey, thanks. Welcome back to this video, and we're going to be talking about gospel-centered discipleship. You did a teaching in a previous video on this, and maybe the best place to start would be if we're implying that we want to focus on gospel-centered discipleship, it implies that there may be other things that we can focus on. And so can you help us identify what are some other things that may divert our focus from gospel-centered discipleship?
Yeah. Well, I do think it's important to note that discipleship is and should be inherently focused on the gospel. But it's really easy as a church and as a youth ministry to veer off. And one of the things that I think is the biggest kind of counterfeit to authentic discipleship is behavior modification. And it's the focus on how do we get kids to behave and look like good Christians. And so we focus on what they're doing, what they're saying, what they look like, and missing the heart of the gospel and the heart of discipleship which is how do we get their hearts to fall in love with Jesus more.
That's good.
And behavior will always follow beholding meaning falling in love with Jesus. But beholding doesn't always follow behavior.
Right.
So it's really possible to change a student's behavior without changing their heart. I would argue if a student's heart is changed, their behavior will always change.
Right. And sometimes with good intention, especially if you're starting a youth ministry kind of thing, it's a desire to see students live healthy and happy. And some of that has to do with living like a Christian. And so we can get focused on how do we make them look like Christians without their hearts having been transformed yet. Right. And so one of the things I think that you're referring to, this idea of is that part of this discipleship is it's worship, not work.
Yeah.
Right. And so in your teaching, you talk about this idea of we're all worshiping something, and you use the term idolatry, which can be tricky. Let's unpack that a little bit, because we haven't seen golden calves in a long time, but that certainly doesn't mean that idolatry doesn't exist in our culture today.
Well, I've seen them in your office, but that's a separate video.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of a term that we kind of easily dismiss if we're not careful. But one of the ways that I like to think about idolatry is this. I think all of the Bible and all of humanity is in desperate attempt to find identity. And one of the ways that I would define identity is a sense of value and worth. So every human heart is wanting and desiring identity. What is the thing that's going to make me feel like I have worth and value? And the biblical narrative and the biblical story is God saying, I'm the one who gives you identity. And your problem is you look outside of me for the identity. So idols are the tools that we use, the things that we use to find identity. And they're always counterfeit. They're always lesser things than God and who Jesus is. And he ultimately is our identity. So the gospel is finding our identity in the truth of the person and work of Jesus, what he's done on my behalf, what I couldn't do for myself. And we rest in that, and we find peace in that and hope in that. And so idols are simply, what are the things that we look to find identity? And we break them down into 4 source idols.
Right. Can we spend a little bit of time, maybe let's take a look at the students that these leaders may be leading with, and let's kind of talk through. The first one that you identify as a source idol is the need for approval, the approval idol.
Yeah.
Help us understand that a little bit more, and then what are some potential things as I'm pacing with a student that I would listen for or identify as, this potentially is an approval idol.
Yeah, and this is my idol of choice. And as we're going through this, I want to encourage you, the first step for you as a leader, figure out what your idols are,
that's
right?
Good.
So approval is the idea that my identity is found in what people think about me, and they're approving of me. And so one of the ways that we see this really fleshed out now is social media.
Yeah.
Social media has ramped this up to a level that we could not imagine. And there's no coincidence that depression, suicide, anxiety are increased as social media is increased. And one of the things I think of, or one of the reasons I think that is because there is approval idols at work in people's hearts. And social media plays on our approval idols like no other.
Yeah.
Right? How many followers do I have? How many likes do I have? How many retweets do I have? What are the comments like? Whatever it is, every platform of social media has different metrics, but they're all the same.
Yeah.
Who values me? Who likes me? What do people think about me?
Yeah.
And so for a student, when they post a picture on there, when they say something on there, when they post a video, it's all about that sense of approval, value, and worth.
Right.
And of course, the problem is it never satisfies, right? So we feel good in the moment, and then that quickly fades, and we need more and more. And so that's for approval idol,
Yeah.
which is a massive one for our students.
Yeah.
Social media is an easy way to see that at work.
Sure, and we have to be really careful as adult leaders what we compliment or what we look at in the lives of our students that could feed that approval idol in them. So, a young lady or a young man spends 2 hours before your youth group gathering dolling themselves up, getting themselves all ready, getting their outfit perfect,
Right.
and they walk in and you're like, "Oh man, you're looking so cute tonight," or whatever, and then they think to themselves, "Okay, this is the standard,"
Yeah.
and you're just trying to like innocently make a connection with them, but all you've done is you've now fed their approval idol, right?
That's right.
This idea of what is my value. The enemy, one of the greatest tools that the enemy has is to make us question our worth, right? Because if we question our worth, then what Jesus did for us wasn't really for me, or wasn't good enough for me, or doesn't cover me. And so, if he can get us to question what our worth is, or who we belong to, then it's a big win for him. The second source idol you talk about is power.
Yeah. Yeah, power is the sense of I find my identity in being in a position of authority over others. And this can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. In fact, I recently heard a statistic that was very alarming about the trends in pornography, that top 10 videos in pornography right now are all based around violence, and there's this massive trend happening that in pornography, everything's becoming more violent. Well, that's really a manifestation of a power idol. And so for our students, many of whom are struggling and addicted to pornography, we can see this manifested within. And so what happens in pornography is, right, I'm fantasizing that I'm in this situation and that I have that power, and that sense of power and authority gives me a greater sense of identity and value and worth. But you can also see it in simple ways like students who want positions of authority in the youth ministry or in the leadership structure. I want to be the one doing this, and I want to have announcement. I want to be overseeing the worship team or the announcements or whatever. It could be minor little things, but it's people that find a greater sense of value and worth because they're in positions of authority over others.
Another way when I'm pacing with students that I think of the power idol is the word control, like what they have control of. Because a lot of teenagers or a lot of young people don't have opportunities for influence and power, but what they can control in their life is that little power piece, right? So life is chaos and crazy at home, and so they're going to try to grab a hold to any little bit of control that they can because of everything else spiraling. So a blow up with a parent over them not being able to do something is a control issue. A relationship that they have with a friend that's going sour, that they're trying to manipulate them or trying to get them to do something that they're not doing, is a control issue. And it looks like it may manifest itself as one thing, but it boils down to a lack of control. And a lot of our teenagers right now, a lot of this Gen Z, the anxiety and the depression that they feel is that they feel like their life is out of control. And but one of the beauties of it is it can, when it's redeemed, develop in them a desire to recognize I'm a part of the solution, right? And so if we want to take away the negative aspect of control in their life, or this false idea of control, it's surrendering control to Jesus and then saying to him, use me as you see fit to bring healing.
That's actually, control is really, that's actually one of the third idols, control or security.
Oh, okay.
You can kind of interchange those, but you hit it beautifully, that concept of I only feel like I have value when everything's going the way I want it, and I know what's happening, and I've got all my pieces in the right places, and when that doesn't happen, I feel this loss, this lack of control, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that's happening more and more now and affecting students to a greater level. And oftentimes what they think is really the problem isn't. What it really is this idol of control, that if I had control, then I'd be happy, then I'd be fulfilled, then I'd be satisfied.
Okay, so we've got approval, we've got power, we've got security, and I apologize for connecting those two a little bit, though they
many
do
of these
feed off
idols
of each other,
are
right?
interconnected. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the last one is the idol of comfort.
Yeah.
Can you help us identify that in our students' lives?
I think along with approval, comfort is the primary idol we're seeing in students' lives these days. And comfort is the avoidance of pain in our life. And so often it's manifested with I will be happy as long as I don't have to go through difficult circumstances, situations, or confront pain in my life. So one of the massive ways we see this manifested, not just in teenagers, but in adults, quite honestly,
Yeah.
is the consumption of media.
It's escapism, right?
It's escapism.
Yeah.
So I will watch hours and hours of Netflix or whatever. I will surf Instagram or TikTok for hours and hours and hours. And what it's doing is it's going, I've got chaos in my life. I've got issues in my life. I've got hurt and pain and brokenness.
Sure.
I don't want to go there. So I'm going to escape. And of course it can, some of the traditional ways that
Substance abuse,
drugs, alcohol,
even relationships, right? Finding comfort in being in a romantic relationship with someone else.
And sex and pornography,
Yeah.
this can happen. You know, you've got students that could watch 10 hours of porn a day.
Yeah.
And what is happening in that moment? It's not about the sex. It's about the escaping from their issue, going into this alternate world.
Right.
And of course, we know the problem is whenever you come back to reality, your problems are all still there.
Sure. So it's helpful to identify the problem, but it's that much more helpful to help them figure out the solution.
Yeah.
So you kind of use 3 parts, and I'd love to unpack those a little bit more, or maybe talk through some examples. You give an example, but let's talk through some more examples of how do we help a student look in, look up, and look out.
Yeah. Yeah, this is key. And so the look-in part is once you've helped them discover, the look-in part is hard.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of time, and students sometimes are not really good talkers, or they're not really self-aware.
Yeah.
So figuring out, and this is adults too, quite honestly, but
Yeah.
so one of the things that we do to help them understand the look-in is, what idol am I looking to?
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, if you're leading a youth ministry, is you have to start being intentional about creating this language of idolatry.
Yeah.
And so I started doing this by first recognizing my own idols.
Yep.
So go through, and I could tell anybody, yeah, my 2 primary idols are approval and comfort.
Yeah.
And here's how I manifest. And so you start recognizing your own idols and communicating about them. Create consistent communication when you're talking with students, if you're doing a Bible study, or just in conversation. And instead of saying to them, here's what your idol is, say it about yourself.
Yeah.
Man, got in a fight with my spouse the other day, and I totally realized it was my approval idol at work. And
Yeah.
over time, as you're consistent with that, they'll start hearing it. They'll start filtering their life and their
Right.
actions through that.
Sure.
So-
and it's linked to this idea of what are they loving more than Jesus, or what are they hoping to find completeness in
Right.
that isn't their identity in their identity
Yeah.
in Jesus, right?
Yeah, and if you can lay out these 4 idols to them, it's helpful for them, because if there's an unlimited number of things, it can kind of be like, I don't really know. But if there's 4 things, you go, which one of those is it? It's easier for them. And typically, we all have a primary one that we look to.
Yeah.
So once you start recognizing it, they'll see it over and over
Sure.
again in their life.
And the reason why we want to start there is because what we're beholding, what we're loving, what we're identifying with then changes what we believe about the world around us,
That's
right?
right.
It changes how we interact in the relationships that we have with one another. It influences how we deal to external stimulus that happens in our lives. And so if we understand what we're loving or what we're trying to find worth in, it affects how we interpret our world, which then affects how we behave, right? And you're
right.
talking about if we start with the behavior piece and we haven't identified the behold piece yet, or the source idol piece in their life, then all we're trying to do is teach them how to act different without changing their heart, which is going to lead to frustration, failure ultimately, which then is even more frustration.
And they may change the behavior, but if they haven't addressed the idol, it'll just manifest in another way.
Yeah. One of the scariest things we can do as accountable, mature, discipling adults is to teach kids how to live like Christians without having a heart
right.
that is surrendered
You're
to
absolutely
Christ.
right.
So we have to look in, and then the next is the look up.
The look up, yeah. And this is really the preach the gospel to your own heart.
Yeah.
And so my encouragement to you again is this takes time building a culture where this language is used and people become more familiar. Don't feel like the gospel is the kind of milk of the Bible and teaching, and well, that's just the beginning. We now got to get to the meat. No. The gospel is everything.
Yeah.
It is. We got to come back to it constantly because
It's
again,
the good news of what Jesus has done
That's right.
on our behalf. And
every issue I have is because I don't believe it. I don't
Right.
believe that truth.
Yeah.
So you've got to not be afraid to hammer this over and over
Sure.
and over with your students and continue to get that language in front of
Yeah,
them.
and it's what takes the message that we're communicating and it makes it the good news and not just good advice.
That's right.
And I think a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about gospel-centered discipleship is we're not just offering good advice, we're offering the good news.
That's right.
So then, Jared, the next part is the lookout.
Yeah. This is so oftentimes when we sin, and certainly when students sin, the byproduct of that is we wrong the people around us.
Sure.
And one of the things that we're talking about in this whole process is to be a follower of Jesus is to be a part of a community. We have a responsibility to each other, and teaching students this is really important. And so when the gospel penetrates our hearts and awakens us to realize our problem, it should also diffuse the issues and the anger and the struggle that we have inside of us towards the people around us, the people that we've wronged. So we try to teach them is, hey, as you've recognized your idols, as you've preached the gospel to your heart, now make sure you follow through on your accountability to the biblical community where if you've wronged somebody, make it right.
Yeah.
Because the gospel should always humble our hearts.
Right.
And remind us that we have a responsibility to each other. So if that's your parent, your teacher,
Right.
your sibling, your youth leader, whoever it is, right?
Yeah.
The end result of the gospel being spoken to your heart, if you've wronged somebody, should be to make that right.
And that's where the whole piece of they'll know that you're Christians by your love, right?
Right.
How you treat each other, how you respond to each other is what this is all tied into.
As love comes into me, it should also then flow out of me.
That's great.